I would recommend using the biggest bowl that you have because it's kind of messy and you really need to like get in there and work with it. So even though the dough is not that big, it's good to have the space so you don't make a mess. Oh, yeah, well, you can learn now. I think several of your clients ate them at one point. Okay, so first is 2 cups of oats. I have made this with quick oats or like rolled oats. Any kind of oats really is fine. But I think that the rolled oats are the best just because they have a little bit of a heartier texture and they do tend to almost dissolve or soften a lot when they're in the bars. So this holds up a little bit better. So 2 cups of oats and 1 cup of oat flour. If you don't buy oat flour, you can just make oat flour by putting your oats in a blender. Whoops, but I usually buy them because it's easier and I'm lazy and I don't want to wash extra dishes. So again, okay, so I will say also that this recipe is not super critical that it's exact. It's not like baking where you have to have a perfect amount of everything, and it's pretty forgiving if you spill a bunch into a bowl or whatnot. Coconut. This is the coconut that I buy. It's unsweetened and shredded, and this is like the fine shredded one, but it really doesn't matter. The only thing I would say not to get is like the sweetened baking coconut shavings that are in the baking aisle by the nuts. I would not recommend that kind because I just think it's gross. See how this has like a really fine texture? And this also really kind of like dissolves into it. You don't notice a lot of coconut taste, and you don't really feel it. It just sort of also melts into these bars. Okay, so oats, oat flour, coconut, protein. This is my protein powder. I pre-measured it as 1 cup. You can use any type of protein powder. This is a vanilla plant protein powder, which, I mean, you can use whey protein. I wouldn't use chocolate. I've never done that. And I don't know that I would use unflavored, although it wouldn't really matter too much. You just want to make sure that there aren't a lot of gums and thickeners in it, or that it has too much like stevia or sweeteners or monk fruit. Like, I wouldn't recommend those. I also don't recommend collagen in this. I would get an actual like plant protein that's like pea protein or rice protein, something along those lines, or a blended plant protein. Okay, so the other dry ingredients are only chia seeds, salt, and cinnamon. Chia seeds, I can't remember what the recipe says, but I made these last night, and I think it says 1/4 cup, but I did like slightly less than that, like probably around 3 tablespoons, which is like 1/4 cup is 4 tablespoons, so I did about 3, so just slightly less than that. Because depending on your liquid and like the consistency of the mix, you may need to add more later, so better to under add than over add. Salt, I think the recipe said 1 to 2 teaspoons. Do you remember what I said last night? If I put 1 teaspoon in? Okay, so yeah, the salty sweet factor in these is really good. It's one of my favorite things. So I do put kind of a lot of salt in them, but I think the recipe that I gave you guys said 2 or 1 to 2, but I would definitely just use 1 or start with 1. Especially if you use a salt like pink salt or sea salt, like Celtic sea salt. To me, those are like saltier than regular iodized table salt. So start on the low end there for sure. Cinnamon, also a teaspoon, which I really don't think, even though that seems like a lot, that you can taste, like they don't taste overly cinnamony. There is a version of these that is an oatmeal cookie, which has raisins and nutmeg and walnuts and cinnamon in it, and that one I use 2 teaspoons of cinnamon, but we'll start with that. Okay, so then once you have all the dry ingredients, can you guys like see into this bowl, or I don't know if the writing is on your part like it is on mine, but okay. So I'm just gonna mix this really well, toss it around so that the salt and the cinnamon and the chia seeds in particular get evenly distributed. And then when we add the wet ingredients, that's when it gets fun. Okay, so once that's very well tossed, is anybody making this along with me and am I going too fast? Let me know. Or if y'all are just watching to make later, then you're good. Okay, so peanut butter. We're doing chocolate peanut butter today, so we're using all peanut butter instead of half peanut butter and half almond butter. Nut butter consistencies vary quite a bit, depending on where you buy them. I will say it doesn't matter if you buy chunky or smooth, but if you buy a pure peanut butter or almond butter that doesn't, that, you know, the oil separates on the top, you definitely want to mix that as well as you can before you start. But this is one of the things that is a little bit, well, this is why the recipe is forgiving, because if you end up with too runny of a nut butter or your mixture is too wet and sticky, you can easily add more chia seeds, which really absorb liquid, or you can add more oat flour, and that also will absorb some of the liquid without really affecting the product. So in order to, where's my 1 cupper? So in order to save on dishes, because I have probably made these hundreds of times. Like at one point I was legitimately paying half of my rent in protein bar orders because I just made a whole lot of them and people really wanted them. So I use the same cup. I actually really only use this when I do it. I don't measure anything else because you don't really need to, and I've done it so many times it's easy to eyeball. So this recipe, the standard recipe calls for 1/2 cup of almond butter and 1/2 cup of peanut butter, but since we are making the dark chocolate peanut butter, I'm just doing all peanut butter. That one's empty. So we're just gonna do 1 full cup of peanut butter. And then just dump it right onto the top of the oat mixture. Right in like the middle of it. And I used to have a little spatula that really got in there, but a knife works fine. And then for the sweeteners, I use 1/2 cup of agave and 1/2 cup of honey, which means I just fill this 1 cup thing up halfway with agave and the rest of the way with honey. And you don't need to measure out like exactly 1/2 and 1/2 of each. You can just eyeball it because it's close enough. The honey is really critical in these for flavor. The agave is more just to cut the honey because it has a more neutral flavor and you don't want it to be overpowering like honey. If you don't have agave, because I know that's like not really something that people use that much anymore. It was trendy back in the day, but I think that pure maple syrup would work fine. On that you can sub easily, or you can try it with all honey if you really like honey, I guess. But I think that might be too sweet. So, okay, so then I just take this mixture and dump it right on top of the nut butter and scrape out as much as I can. Also, using the same measuring cup allows it to come out because you already have this like fatty coating on the side from the nut butter, so it just all slides right out super easily. We're done with that. So, okay, and then lastly, vanilla and almond. These are both critical. You don't want to skip the almond extract for sure. So I would do, I think, 1 to 2 teaspoons of vanilla. Okay, well that's like 1 1/2, and that's all I have. And then almond extract, I do like 1 teaspoon, which seems like a lot, but again, it's a really important flavor in these, I think. Okay, and in other versions, like if you, I do one that's like a maple pecan, and what else do I have? I use this maple extract, which smells like waffles and is super good. So I use that in like the maple pecan one. Different flavors have different add-ins, but it's easy to like switch them out. Okay, so at this point, we still have to add in our chocolate and our peanuts, but at this point I'm going to stir this bowl because you want to get it a little bit more mixed together before you start to add in the chunks of stuff. And so for this part, you really have to like fold. It's kind of like an under over technique. So you scoop down under and then fold across and into the center. And you just really do that like 100 times until it comes together. And it seems like it's not going to come together, or it's too dry or too wet or whatever. But it will eventually come together if you just keep like kind of redistributing the mass. And then again, I like scrape towards the far outside of the bowl and then bring it into the center and press down. And I also hold my spatula for this like really close to the top because you need a lot of power. I've made these in an electric mixer before, but I don't know. I don't think they come out as well because after this you actually have to use your hands, and for me that was just more it was more work to use the mixer and then still have to use your hands at the end. So okay, I have to get my can you get my baking pan and parchment? I didn't even like lay that out, which is in the freezer because we made these last night because I wanted to show you how they come out when they're done. And no, I need the one that's actually in the freezer. Okay, but can you get me a piece of parchment paper? Okay. So my sous chef Joe is helping me with this. I'll show you that part later, but okay. Great. Thank you. Okay, so anyway, you want to mix until it's fully blended. Like, see how here you'll keep finding like pockets of powder. Like I can see down here that I have like more powder. So I'll scrape a couple more times, and then once it starts to come into like this dough ball, almost like a ball of cookie dough, at this point I will use my hands. So, well, sorry, I forgot to add in the chocolate chips and crap. Okay, so I'll kind of spread it back out into the bowl like this so that it has open surface area, and then chop up some peanuts and chocolate. My worst habit in life probably is I don't use cutting boards, and I know that that's really frowned upon, so I'm sorry. But from my understanding, it's not like these countertops are quartz, so they're not going to get damaged, but it's my knife that's going to get dull, and I just suffer the consequences of that. Okay, so peanuts. These are just honey roasted peanuts. The original recipe was cranberry almond, and I used sliced almonds and dried cranberries in it, and then developed this one with chocolate peanut butter. You don't need to have peanuts, honestly, but I like to have a little bit of extra crunch in them. So yeah, I also just don't push that hard. Like, I'm not doing that much damage to my knife, right? I don't know. Real chefs out there are probably appalled at this. Okay. So the peanuts, this is probably like 2 tablespoons. I'd maybe use like a 1/4 cup, but, and again, this is something that you can like do to your own preference. Like if you want, if you like having the crunch in there, or if you'd rather them be like chewy, kind of, I guess, the same as your preference if you like crunchy or smooth peanut butter. Okay, and then dark chocolate. You can use chocolate chips. You can use anything you want. These are just like leftovers from bars of chocolate. So I just give this a rough chop, super loosely. And I'm doing, again, like a 1/4 cup of this, but doesn't need to be exact by any means. Lindsay. Hey, Shane. Aw, hope you guys are good. Lindsay is a real chef, you guys. Like, she went to culinary school and everything, and she's probably just horrified at my chopping on the counter using a paper towel cutting board. Okay, so now we have this glorious mix with our add-ins in. So, yes. Okay, so then I just kind of like mix it again lightly with the spatula, but as you can see, the spatula is like really struggling. It's not really doing anything at this point because it gets very thick. So I'm done with that, and at this point I get a 13 by 9 pan and line it with parchment paper. I mentioned this before that I don't recommend using aluminum foil in place of parchment. I've done that before, but it's really kind of sticky and it just doesn't come out well. So I press it into the corners like that so it stays flattened out. And then you do the same technique that you did with the spatula with your hand. So I dig down under the base and then flip it over and press. And I just do that a lot of times. And then you just kind of start, you know, I don't know, massaging it. It's Christmas hair. Sorry, Christmas. Yeah, you know, just kind of just have to follow your heart. Just mush it up until you feel like it's thoroughly mixed and all of the add-ins that we added are not like crumbling out onto the ground or onto the bottom of the bowl. Okay, so then you get this kind of like big brick, and okay, Joe's making me laugh, sorry. Put it into the center of the pan, and then you're gonna press. This is the workout part, where you start at the center. You guys can see what I'm doing here. And just press out all the way to the edges, and you really need to make sure that you thoroughly press it out all the way to the edges. And it takes a couple minutes to spread it out there, but it will come out and it will go out to the edges, and then it smooth out and be perfectly flat. And at this stage, it feels really sticky, like your hands kind of get covered in it. But once you get it flat and you press it, it actually loses its stickiness and it becomes really smooth and like almost glossy flat on the top. So, pressing in. Took me a long time to get this part down, to be honest, because it was always, see how right now it's super lumpy, which is fine. They still taste good, but I was selling these, so I wanted them to be perfect. And I actually had this little roller. It was like this cute little marble roller that was about 3 inches long, and I'd just be pressing them down so they'd be super flat and square. Okay, so you get them down. Christmas, no. Okay, so at this point, they're pretty well flattened out. And I also kind of take my fingers and press along the edges because the edges get like lumpy. It doesn't really matter because you're gonna cut them off anyway. I'll show you that part in a second. Okay, hand washing. Your hands will be covered with gunk at this point. Okay, so at this point, you don't have to do this, but when I was selling them, I would take extra of the add-ins, like the peanuts and chocolate, and spread them on top. I used all my chocolate, but whatever. Or cranberries or almonds or like whatever things you're using, just so that the top of them look pretty, and every bite has some of the flavor ingredients in it. Okay, so then you put them in the freezer. They don't have to be frozen, but you just do that so that they firm up enough so that you can cut them and they get clean edges. Yeah. When I started Vibe Chefs, I shopped at Whole Foods so much that I still have it. Can you get me that? I would get the green rubber bands that they put on like produce and everything, and I started just collecting them, and this is what it is now, which this hasn't been touched in years, but it was, it's really heavy. And anyway, this is like the little baby of my company, I don't know. Okay, so then you put them in the freezer, and when they come out, okay, this is how good they are, that we made these last night, but we already ate half of them, and I wanted to show you like the full sheet that comes out, but we failed. So you can see how the edges, when they come out, are kind of like, they have this rough edge. And so I guess if you're just making these for yourself, nobody cares about this, but I cut them off evenly across all of the sides, all 4 sides, and then you have the scraps. Some of my like clients' friends who lived with them would benefit on the scraps, because I would like put the scraps in a baggie and leave them in the fridge for them, and then the bars would go to the clients. But anyway, okay, so then you have like this rectangle with even sides, and then you cut it this Joe's eating my scraps. Okay, so this would have been like the halfway point. You should get 12 bars out of this, so well, I'll just cut it in half this way first, and then you would cut it. So I'd cut it all the way down this way and then across 5 times so that you get 6 bars out of it each way. And then they come out about this big. We made cranberry pecan ones last night, so there they are. And then this is like what I put the toppings on the top and press them back in so that it looks pretty on the top. And then I would put them in little sleeves and sell them. I even had little labels and tags, and it was a real thing. So it was a fun chapter of my life. But anyway, they are pretty addicting and pretty, I mean, they're pretty healthy, right? They're real food. They're not low in sugar, but they're nutrient dense and vegan, gluten-free, dairy-free, not paleo, not keto. Anyway, nobody cares. They're good. So thank you for watching. If you have questions, please let me know. I'd be happy to help. I think we'll do another one with the jars, because a lot of you guys wanted to do the jars, which are really pretty similar in ingredients. So if you have all of this stuff, you should have most of what you need for the jars, and we can work on that next time.